All right, everybody.
Hey,
Thanks for joining us here today. We have with us Rod Bird. Met Rod, JR, man, we met early on in the campaign season this year. Got to know each other pretty well. And what a fantastic candidate. What I've said about this election cycle is all the good candidates we have. It seems like we're using them all up at the same time. But JR, thanks for joining me today, man. How's things?
things are good. And thanks for having me on today. It's been a pleasure getting to know a lot of people throughout the campaign trail, but especially you and your wife, Amy. I mean, you guys are salt of the earth, just good, down to earth people. And lifelong relationship there. But things are going good in the campaign. We're here in Heber, Utah today, just still stumping, going through the neighborhoods and doing what we need to do to get the vote out. So,
Hey, we got a couple days left before all the ballots, everything's said and done. So, I mean, it's crunch time for everybody. So, before we really dive into a few of the issues, tell everybody a little bit about yourself, where you come from, what you do, a little bit about your background.
yeah. So, if you haven't heard already, I was born and raised in the Uinta Basin, so I'm a rural guy. I've lived in rural Utah my whole life. And, several years ago, 17 years ago, I started my first business in the oil and gas industry. That's a big deal out in the Uinta Basin. It's one of the largest plays, not only in Utah, but the nation, and heavily affected by, federal government regulations, public lands, all of those things. But something that's near and dear to my heart. So, been doing that for the last 17 years. I was elected mayor 7 years ago. Prior to that, I served on the city council for a couple of years and saw some significant issues within government and really educated myself on the issues, the problems, and not only that, the solutions. So I went to le.utah.gov, looked up the state constitution, state code, our own codes, ordinances, and really started to implement things. That's when I decided to run for mayor because I saw that was an opportunity to change things, which we did. Um, as of as far as I know, we're one of the only councils that has term limits. That's one of the first things I did once we got a new council voted in there and kind of corrected all of those problems. And so, we put term limits on ourselves. I'm in my second term. Thank goodness. I thought I was done with politics in general, but felt very strongly that we needed some leadership in other areas. And so, but one of the things that I'm most proud of in Roosevelt that we did is we talk about who's supposed to be in charge in government and where the power should lie. And it's really with the people. And we know that. We say we the people, that's the preamble of the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence, states that. And that's where it should lie. So one of the things that we did in Roosevelt is we implemented 5 committees that we work with now. And they're the ones that really drive the vision and, for what we're doing in Roosevelt. Just yesterday, I had the opportunity to officiate in the grand opening of one of our trail systems and nature parks and everything else, and that was due to just community involvement and collaborating and really letting the people be in charge of the vision for our city. And I think we need to really get back to that, not only in local government but in all government.
Yeah, I know. That to me is kind of one of the places where I believe that government has gone awry is, we lose that. We lose that touch to the people and we lose that connection to them. And it becomes so far removed from it that, they forget what they're actually there and what the actual role of government is. And so I think you're right on that one. So as you travel the state, you and I both know you travel the state and everybody wants to tell you their problems. Everybody wants to tell you the issues. They want to tell you what's wrong and where it's wrong. What are the issues that you see that are at the top of the list for folks right now as far as what is concerning people here in the state of Utah?
Yeah, and that's a broad question, and it's kind of a broad answer because it depends on what state or what part of the state you're in. But overall, I think there are three main things that people are very concerned about. They're concerned about our national debt. They're concerned about how much money we're spending as government, as a federal government, inflation, the cost to live. Not only groceries but affordable housing and all of these things. They're concerned about um, the border and having people just flooding across the border, not only uh, you know through Biden's policies, but then the gotaways and illegals and people that are coming to do us harm. I mean, there's a lot of things happening at the border. Our energy policies, energy drives the cost of everything. And, the fact that our energy policies are completely backwards in my mind is what they should be. There's a lot going on in our nation. So those are the three. And then our foreign policy. Look at the wars and the conflicts that have begun because, in my opinion, we have a weak presidency and a weak administration. So there are some things that people are very, very concerned about. But when it comes to, affordability for family, housing, the border, those are some of the most prominent things that I hear. And then obviously in rural Utah, and where you and I are from, public lands and federal government overreach and all of these things that really affect our lives in a large degree that we don't have a lot of control over.
No, no, and I think from all the other candidates that I've talked to, those are the pressing issues among Utahns. I mean, and so it's pretty easy to pin down where people feel like they're at right now because you look through it. And again, it's inflation, it's the southern border, it's we can't afford to live, it is the war in Ukraine, it is Israel, it is all of these things. And so let's start with that first one because I think all of those problems that we mentioned are really a trickle down effect from the national debt. When you talk about inflation, when you talk about not being able to afford a house, those are things because of unfettered government spending. We know how this works. We know how this ends. And to you, what does that look like? What does the national debt look like? What should we do, and what can we do?
Yeah, and there are things that we can do. This is going to be one of the biggest problems that we face as Congress. It's going to be, it's going to take the longest time, in my opinion, to correct this problem. But let's start with what really caused high inflation recently, and that was the Inflation Reduction Act. I mean, if that wasn't a smoke and mirror act, I don't know what was. So
Sure.
when you inject hundreds of billions of dollars that you've borrowed into the economy, and you have fewer, and then that came right after COVID and supply chain issues and everything else. So you have much more dollars, many more dollars, chasing fewer goods. You're going to have, high inflation. So that was one of the first things recently. And then to put a moratorium on drilling on federal lands and those types of things, and shutting our mines down, which increased energy costs. You had a double whammy, in my opinion. So you had the Inflation Reduction Act, then you have the energy policies that changed, which created, in my opinion, this hyperinflation that we're experiencing now. And then you compound that with the federal budget, which is awful. I mean, we're at a $1.9 trillion deficit every single year. And that's if we just adhere to the budget that we're looking at, but we don't. And so we continue to spend more like $2.5–3 trillion a year. And that's really putting a burden on our society. It's devaluing the dollar. How we rein that in, I find it really interesting. Studying the budget. So last year, we had $6.2 trillion overall federal budget. And then we had a $1.8 trillion deficit. This year, we have $7.2 trillion overall budget, so 1 trillion more. Our deficit is 1.9 trillion. So we've increased our federal budget, and our deficit has stayed about the same. What that tells me is we have approximately 1 trillion more in revenue this year than we did last year. So where is that $1 trillion being spent? I found half of it. We have Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, but then we have this other mandatory welfare spending. 500 billion of it is going into that. So if we have the best economy we've ever seen, which is what the Biden administration is touting, if we have the best economy we've ever seen, then why did we add 50% to welfare spending? Right. We should, if people are working and have jobs, that should be opposite. But the point I'm trying to make is if we just held spending from last year to this year, we would cut our deficit in half, directly in half, just by holding spending alone.
Yeah.
And then we can look at budgetary.
Right. And then we talk about budget cuts. But as of next year, I believe they said that servicing our national debt will become the largest line item in the budget. I think they said about 2.5 trillion. And we cannot keep spending at the rate we're spending. And I believe across the country, we have to keep doing. I said it in my convention speech, and I'll say it again. Show me one place in this country that's better off because Democrats are in charge. Then why do we keep trying to compromise with the Democrats and making a deal with them when we know that all it's doing is taking us the wrong way? And you get too many people in Congress, and that's what they want to do. They want to compromise us out of a country. And it's all in the name of being nice. It's all in the name of whatever you want to call it, but it's wrong. And it's time that we get away from that because that has done nothing but lead us to where we're at right now.
Exactly. One of the things I think is important, and I've said this throughout the campaign trail, you've probably heard me say it 20 times, but I'm going to say it again, and that is single subject legislation. You know, these omnibus bills, these big spending packages that are pushed through. And I've seen other people talk about this. We have the 12 appropriations budgets and an actual process and procedure that we should be following to approve these. But ultimately, single subject legislation, I would propose legislation that wouldn't allow Congress to work on anything else except for the budget and budget related items until it's passed. We have volumes and volumes and volumes of laws and uh, everything else. We don't need to legislate any more laws. What we need to do is start rolling some of those back, but we need to pay attention because the budget and holding the purse strings to the greatest nation on earth is our number one fiduciary responsibility, and we're not taking it serious, and we need to. So those are a few things. If we would just implement a few of those things and really focus on that, we can tackle this problem, and that's what
Yeah.
I want to do once elected.
No, and our spending weakens us as a country. It weakens our future. It weakens our national security. It weakens all the things that we truly hold dear as Americans. It weakens our freedom for that matter. And it makes life harder for everyone else. And so when I come back to it and I say, show me where life's better because Democrats are in charge, Republicans, they've got a problem too. I don't care what party it is, I don't care which part you're from. Spending is out of control and it's time we rein it in. And Republicans are just as guilty. They've spent as much under Republican administrations as they have under Democratic administrations. It's time Congress claws back that power, takes control of the purse, and actually holds it to it because it's time we start cutting or we're going to be in trouble. And not just us, it's going to fall upon our kids to deal with it. That's the problem.
Sure. Well, if you look at the debt clock right now, you can see that as soon as you become a taxpayer in the United States, you've inherited $266,000 of debt. You're welcome. Does
Yeah, you're
that sound
welcome.
like the land of freedom and opportunity? That sounds like bondage and servitude to me. But yeah, you mentioned a few things there that really frustrate me because one of my earliest memories of really paying attention to politics was during the George Bush era, and we had the presidency and we had the Senate and the House, and we blew money like it was going out of style. And I thought, you have got to be kidding me. And then it happened again just recently under Trump's administration. And I'm not bad mouthing Trump, but
No, but
you got
the
to give
truth's the
credit where
truth. They
credit's
blew
due.
out the spending. I think that's all there is to it.
And I thought, oh, the two times in my life, I was thinking, we're Republicans. We know better than this. We're fiscal, conservatives, and we've got to do way better than this.
Or we're supposed to be fiscal conservatives. I mean, that's the key there. And so I mean that is a big concern for everybody, not just that. The thing I hear the most from folks is we're funding other people's wars, we're funding other countries, we're sending all this money to other countries, humanitarian aid, doing all these things. And yeah, we got to look out for the world, but we are borrowing money to give to other countries to defend their borders when we don't even defend our own. And that leads us to the second point we hear all the time is what's happening at southern border. That will go defend Ukraine's borders, we'll go give money to Egypt to shore up their borders. We'll go do all these things for other countries, but yet our border remains wide open under the current administration, and it is putting the lives and livelihoods of American citizens in jeopardy. Where do we go?
Absolutely. And so, first of all, understanding that we already have laws in place that will secure that border is really frustrating. And having looked into this, and I've read the Mayorkas report, I've read a lot of documentation in what's happening with the Biden administration. And what they've done is they found a provision in the law called parole. And in 1996, though, under Clinton's administration, that provision was fortified to say that you can only use parole in a case-by-case basis, under extreme circumstances and or for public benefit. And so what's happened is Biden's exploited that, and he's using the parole provision to parole millions of people into our country. So instead of detaining them, sending them back, detaining them in these detention camps or whatever until their court date, they're just booking them in the system, allowing them in our country with a court date. They may or may not show up, and we have hundreds of thousands a month and millions over the course of years coming into our country this way, and it's ridiculous. So we've allowed these people to be put to the front of the line that are basically breaking the law, and the people that are trying to do it legally, we're making them wait years. We're making them pay tens of thousands of dollars to get here. Does that sound like a good plan where we're incentivizing bad behavior and punishing good behavior? I mean, we ought to be doing the opposite. So first and foremost, executing the laws is what we need to be doing. But I have some other ideas on that as well we can get into. So.
Sure. No, and for me, the one of the biggest ones we need to tackle is the Remain in Mexico policy, because under Trump, they had instituted the Remain in Mexico policy. We weren't turning people loose at the border into the interior of the United States. They were to remain in Mexico until their claims of amnesty were vetted. And we weren't having this problem, because now they're letting them into the interior of the United States. They're capturing them at the border. They're documenting them, and they're saying, hey, show up for this court date in 6 years. We'll see you then. And you never see them again. They don't show up, and they're not planning on showing up. I hate to break it to you, my Orcus, but they're not going to show up. So, but I think that is first and foremost. I think for me, first and foremost is Remain in Mexico policy. We need to reinstitute that, because then Mexico is going to stop them at their southern border. They're going to say, hey, we don't want all these people in here. We're going to push you back into the Central America and say, hey, you stay in the country. If your claims of amnesty are really true, you stay in the country that is next in line where you should be creating amnesty. We're not crossing 6 or 8 other countries and then claiming amnesty in the United States, never to be seen again. The other one for me is it's time to finish the wall. I mean, it was working in the places that it was being used. It was directing the traffic, at least slowing it down and making it, and let the border control patrol do their job.
Exactly. And you've hit on a couple of things, though. So Remain in Mexico, I said this throughout my whole campaign, but what we need to make sure is that the Remain in Mexico policy is codified through Congress so that it can't be overruled or overturned by another administration. That's exactly what we saw when Trump was in office. I think he had it right under Title 42, the health code. He implemented that as a executive order. It was working great. And then you had Biden come in, and I read Biden's executive order that basically erased all of that. And so we need to make sure that that's codified first and foremost through Congress, to make sure that Congress is, well, first of all, the executive branch is just pushing and adhering to the law that Congress has passed. That's the way the Constitution is written, and that's the way we should be behaving. The second thing you mentioned, and I'm going to go into some of my mayor experience. So Roosevelt, Utah, just a few years ago when I became mayor, was considered the second most dangerous city. Some people say first. I'm saying second, but it was one of the most dangerous cities in Utah. So what did I do? We looked at our police force. We restructured. We gave them the funds that they needed. We paid them more. We got more officers, and we gave them training and equipment that they needed. I had a report, now it's been close to a month and a half, 2 months ago, that showed that in Roosevelt, we've reduced our violent crime by 37%, and we're no longer even on the top 10 list. The thing that I think is super important about the border is able to get here. We need to make sure that we simplify the process for good people to get here. We need to have stricter and harsher penalties for those that are coming illegally. And then we need to look at like H-2A and laws and ways for people to come up, work during the season, the work season, and then go home. And we're not really capitalizing on that either. So this is a problem. I think there are 2 or 3 different angles we need to be approaching this problem from at any given time. And it's something that, like you had mentioned, under Trump's administration, it was much, much better than it is now because of the focus and attention that the funds that were going. Look, I talked to a border agent during a couple of them, but one in particular that was, I think, on the front line in Yuma, Arizona. He said when Trump was in office, everything was going well. They only have, I think, 8,000 crossings in that area that year. And that jumped to, as soon as Biden got in office, about over 100,000.
Wow.
That year. So you can just see that. And they're still, he said, they were building wall, they were putting it up. He said, as soon as Biden got in office, he said, stop. There's still metal, steel, materials that are laying on the ground, rusting away, that are not being utilized because Biden said, no go.
No, and I
That's
think
real.
it's more of a mindset than anything. When they see you weakening on policy and when people see weakness and they think, oh man, this border is going to be wide open, they come. It doesn't matter what the policy is. It doesn't matter what anything else is going on. When they see weakness, they're all for it. And they came in droves and they came by caravans. And we saw this early on in the Biden administration. And it has to be rectified because the safety of American citizens is really under attack at this point because what's happening at the southern border, it's not an accident. You can't mess it up this bad unless you're doing it on purpose. And so with that, it kind of opens up the gates to what else we can do as Americans. What else is going on right now that affects us? And earlier on, you mentioned energy policy, and I know you have pretty good expertise in the energy sector. You spent a lot of time there. Here in Utah, we do have a large energy sector, especially in Congressional District 3. The energy sector, the oil and gas sector in CD3 is probably the biggest of any in the state. So where do you see us going, and how has the new administration's rules and the ban on federal drilling, how has that affected Congressional District 3 and what can we do about it?
Well, in a lot of different ways, because so one of the things that the Biden administration did recently, you talked about oil and gas, but we also have, I mean, look at it. We have oil and gas, we have coal, we have uranium, we have the only uranium processing plant in the nation in District 3 in Blanding, Utah. So
Yeah.
we have a plethora and an abundance of energy of different sorts. And so, first of all, the public land issue, really putting a moratorium on the drilling, that not only hurts the basin, that hurts Utah because when we're able to drill on those federal lands, we get federal lease money coming back to the state. It goes to schooling, it goes to the community impact board that benefits several counties throughout the state. So those are funds that we're not getting right now because we can't drill on federal lands. We're still drilling on private lands, but it's also increased the price of oil, which is not awful, honestly, for the oil and gas industry. But it is terrible for the economy because,
Yeah.
again, oil prices, energy prices affect the prices of everything. And so that has caused, quite a bit of inflation. But I find the other thing that is really interesting is we have uranium. Like I'd mentioned, they've been having a difficulty getting permitting to open mines and things like that to produce uranium. Our Biden administration Biden himself implemented a monument or designated a monument at the southern end of Utah and northern end of Arizona, one of the largest uranium deposits in our state and in the nation. So why in the world would he do that? Now, this is where it really bothers me because and I'm sure we'll get into the conflict between Ukraine and Russia, but I was going to ask you, how much uranium do you think we're producing here in the United States? And it's almost nothing. We're
Yeah.
purchasing 90+% of our uranium from other countries to fuel power plants. So Kazakhstan, Australia, and Canada, and guess who else?
Russia.
Percent of our uranium from Russia.
Yep.
So I thought we were funding Ukraine war, not the Russian war.
No, but we're funding both sides of it but we're funding both sides of it in every aspect of it. We're both funding both sides of the Ukraine war. We're funding both sides of the war in Israel against Hamas because we're buying oil from OPEC. We're kissing up to all those people because we don't have a solid energy production here in the United States anymore because the Biden administration has gutted it. Because under Trump, like him or hate him, whatever it is, under Trump, we had set loose the American energy sector and we had freed it up to do its job. And it was producing and we were exporting. We were no longer dependent on other countries to fuel our economy, to fuel our military, to fuel any of these things. And yet, what's the first thing the Biden administration does? They gut it.
Yeah. So it's really interesting. And energy is not only, not only is it an issue as far as inflation and costs and things like that, but it's obviously, and you've alluded to it, it's a national security issue, a huge
Sure it is.
national security issue. And so, we look at other things that we're dependent on. You look at rare earth minerals that we're getting from China right now. Well, guess what? That uranium processing plant in Blanding, Utah is gearing up and making accommodations to where they can actually extract rare earth minerals right there. So we need to be promoting that and helping that along and making sure that we're able to do those types of things in the United States. So it's not just oil and gas, it's coal, it's nuclear, it's even renewables, and rare earth minerals. You look at even microprocessing and things like that, where we don't have any of these facilities in the United States. And if we're not producing our own energy, if we're not producing a lot of these things that are necessary for our way of life, and we're beholden to countries that don't like us, this is a very, very tough position to be in. And I'm afraid we're getting left behind when it comes to a lot of these things. So
Oh,
it's something that
100%.
we definitely need to we need to put a lot more focus on it. And I think we're asleep at the wheel to a large degree.
No, you're 100% correct. And it's not just in the energy sector. It's not in any sector in particular. I mean, you look at agriculture, you look at energy, you look at all of these other sectors. What are we doing? We've outsourced these for years and years and years. And now, I mean, during COVID, we saw it firsthand. We couldn't get chips. We couldn't get anything. You saw lots and lots of cars that were full to the brim and you couldn't get chips to run these vehicles. They couldn't put them out of the assembly line. We have become dependent on other countries in about every aspect of American manufacturing, American processing to take those away. And it's time that we put back an emphasis on American production and do everything that we can to bring that production here and protect what production we do have. And I believe Congress plays a critical role in that.
Absolutely. And as I've looked and seen, and I think you mentioned, I watched one of your other podcasts, and you talked a little bit about tariffs. You talked about tariffs for agriculture. When Trump was in office, he actually implemented some tariffs on steel, Chinese steel. And at first, in the oil and gas industry, so I source a lot of the things that I sell globally. Most of it's domestic. I try to use as much domestic product as possible, but there are times when you need to globally source these things, and so supply chain issues, and then also, when you get foreign product, it can be cheaper. So I saw an immediate change, an increase in steel costs and pipe costs and things like that. So it did, to a degree, negatively impact the economy in the beginning. And the whole point of that was to make China play fair and everything else. I mean, they have totally different labor laws than we do. They have totally different, regulations than we do, and so they can produce this stuff much, much cheaper. And so when we dilute our market with those things, it kind of hurts our own steel manufacturers and our own manufacturing here in the United States. But what happened was the price did increase a little bit, but then we saw a lot of manufacturers reshore here in the United States, and it created jobs, and it started to boom the economy. And so it's an interesting concept. But if you go back far enough, we didn't have federal income tax. The way they funded the federal government was through tariffs and things like
Tariffs.
that. So,
Yep.
yeah, so it's really interesting. But so people look at that sometimes negatively, but at the same token, it also boosted our economy. It created jobs. And it was absorbed through the market, through the economy. So, very interesting concept. But
Yeah. But far too often you see Republicans shy away from the tariff thing because they say, oh, it's a free market. It's this, it's that. Well, sorry, guys. Free market no longer exists because other countries are no longer playing by the same rules that we're being required to, albeit climate rules or labor laws or anything along those lines. They don't adhere to those principles nor those policies, but yet we are. We are made to play this game with a hand tied behind our back, and it disproportionately puts the United States behind in this race. But as you said, we've watched things move back, and we've actually seen American manufactured products be competitive in this global market now because they're forcing them to move back here because we can actually get them. And I think as we continue to level this playing field, that we have an opportunity to put the American manufacturing back on top of a global standard. And again, I believe that this is Congress's job to do, and it is their job to legislate. And I've said it on the last couple of podcasts that this year, there is a growing appetite for these tariffs. You've seen in agriculture, especially shrimp, rice, blueberries. There have been 8 or 10 different bills put forward this year from Senate Finance and House Ways and Means to put tariffs on these products coming into the United States because we are losing our domestic industries in those sectors because of the terrible price differentiation that is coming out of these other countries. And again, I believe that this is Congress's job to play in.
yeah, 100%. I think another thing that really plays a part in our ability to produce things at a cheaper rate is regulation. You look how regulated a lot of our businesses are, a lot of our industries are, and it is just ridiculous. If you want to start, we had this discussion during a lot of the debates and throughout this campaign. And why do we have such expensive housing? Where does a lot of the inflation costs come from? And we've already alluded to many of those, but what we don't talk about a lot of times is regulation. So if you're looking at the 2x4 that you're buying for your house and you want to build affordable housing, but now 2x4 is $8 a 2x4 instead of $2 a 2x4. I mean, that is 3-4 times the cost, and it's because of regulation. I was down in San Juan County, and they were talking about how they had a lumber industry down there, and now it's been kind of quashed because of regulation and certain things that has been done at the federal level. And so we cannot continue to over-regulate our industries and then expect us to be competitive in the marketplace. And that is Congress's job, is to look at this and say, okay, BLM, okay, Forest Service, all right, Department of Energy, back off. Yes, there are certain necessary things that are there to protect and help the American public, but then there are things that are just completely ridiculous that are being imposed on businesses and industry that are really turning the tides and making things so much more expensive. And you being an ag producer and me being in that as well, we see that. Look at the price of fertilizer right now.
Yeah.
I don't know what it's like in your neck of the woods, but where I'm at,
You don't,
I'm
you
paying
don't,
2 times.
you don't fertilize because it's too expensive.
Right. And that's an indirect cost as well, of overregulation, but it's also natural gas. The synthetic nitrogen and fertilizer that we use comes from natural gas. When the prices spike because of the Biden administration's policies and regulations, it affects everything. And that's what I'm looking at. Deregulation and just doing common sense approach to a lot of these things is what's needed. So one of my focuses going about there is not to create more laws, but look at the laws and regulations that we do have that are just completely ridiculous, and let's just get them off the books. We have way too much government overreach when it comes to these things.
No, there are studies out there by the Foundation for Government Accountability, I believe, and Center for Prosperous America that show that 30 to 40% of the housing costs could be cut by deregulation. And you want to talk about problems and you want to talk about a free market, let's talk about a free market because these regulations are really heavy-handed. They are affecting all of our industries, especially the housing. But when you talk about fertilizer, I think that's a perfect segue into what's happening globally and what's happening in the Ukraine, because a lot of the fertilizers, synthetic fertilizers we use, yeah, they come out of Ukraine and they're shipped through the ports, and that's how they end up here in the United States. Look at Europe, man. They were in a big, big pinch when this war first started. And it seems like this continues to be a problem because we are putting other countries before our own and we're not taking care of ourselves first. So, as far as Ukraine goes, because I know that Ukraine and Israel, that is at the top of a lot of people's mind, especially here in the state. Where do we go from here? What do you see as the future for the Ukraine war? Because some people are frankly done with it.
We've been asked, a lot of us have been asked, would we support more funding or more aid to Ukraine, and what our thoughts on Ukraine are. And I've seen, again, I watched some of your podcasts and things like that in talking with Ukraine, and I think, like you had mentioned, Ukraine. There were some problems when Trump was in office, and the quid pro quo thing came up.
Right.
That's because there was money being laundered back to elected officials in the United States, and he
Sure.
got beat up over that. But I have to admit, I would have asked the same question and said, Ukraine, before we send you any more money, we want you to do an investigation and see where that money's going. So very interesting concept. But the way I look at it is this: we've touched on it a little bit earlier on, and that is, we've sent hundreds of billions of dollars of aid to Ukraine, but then we're buying 12% of our uranium from Russia. The oil sanction on Russia still allows them to sell their oil at $60 a barrel to countries like Greece and India and others. Then we're buying refined products from fuel and things like that from Greece and India, and so is our NATO allies. And so indirectly, we're funding Russia through through a loophole in the sanction in the oil sanctions.
Sure,
And
we are.
then in the middle of this, yeah, in the middle of this conflict, then we have our leader, our chief, uh, put a pause on LNG exports, to expand LNG exports to Europe. So if we do that, then we're forcing Europe to also purchase fuel, LNG gas from Russia. So we're funding both sides of this war. I can't stand to see that happen. It's frustrating. It makes you wonder who's actually the beneficiary of this. And the thing that frustrates me the most is you have hundreds of thousands of people that have lost their lives in this conflict. If we're going to be involved in Ukraine at all, I think, just like Trump said before, and just like I feel now, we need NATO allies to make sure that they're stepping up to the plate and they're pulling their fair share of the weight, which I don't think they are right now. And the
You
other
bet.
thing is we need massive, massive sanctions on Russia. We need to starve them out. I mentioned this in the debate last week. And then the day after the debate, so we debated on Wednesday, Thursday, an article came out and said, Russian economy shaken after U.S. imposes new sanctions. And I thought, finally, for
You
crying
don't
out loud, we've
say.
been in this conflict for 2 years. Yeah, 2 years now. And, we have things at our disposal to actually end this conflict quickly and decisively, but we're not using it. And I'm not saying sending troops. And I'm not saying we even need to send any more aid. Let's just cut them off.
No, I think we're getting close to the end of it. The ballots are out. Everybody's voting. We're about there. Give everybody your last appeal. Why you?
Well, that's a good question. As I've gone around the district, there is people just want somebody, one, that has integrity, somebody that's honest, somebody that will do what they say they're going to do. And as mayor of Roosevelt, you can ask those people that are my constituents there. I made certain promises and I fulfilled everything that I said I would do. As your next representative, having the understanding and the expertise in oil and gas and public lands and water, having served on the Central Utah Water Board for 8 years, being an ag producer, living next to a federally recognized tribe, these things that I have experience in that are so critical for our district are things that I think everybody wants to see in our district. Of course, the Wasatch Front is an integral part and a major part of this district, and I understand those issues with infrastructure and affordable housing and traffic and all the things that are important to them. But ultimately, I'm doing this for change. I'm doing this because as many, and I'm sure this is partly why you got in the race, is you want to see change. You want to see good things happen. We're tired of $35 trillion in debt. We're tired of the border policies and the energy policies that we see. And we want somebody that's going to go in there and fight for those things that are near and dear to us, somebody that's going to change things, somebody that's willing to put forth the effort to really make a difference. And that's why I'm running. So birdforcongress.com is my website. That's bird, F-O-R, congress.com. And yeah, would love to earn your vote. So
Dale, thank you for what you're doing. Campaign's not for the faint of heart. It's tough on everybody. It's tough on families. And to you and your wife, I wish you guys the best. Best of luck next week. And everybody, again, get out and vote. And we'll see you next time. Bye now.